as a gender therapist, I can't wait to show you how misleading the PragerU documentary is. So PragerU spent $1 million promoting on X, aka Twitter. YouTube refused to take any money for it to be advertised, thank goodness. So as a therapist who's focused on gender issues for the past 15 years, I want to just offer 3 ways that this documentary is one-sided, fear-mongering, and lacks any real nuance about the complete transgender experience. And I want to tell you how I think this movement relates to the ex-gay movement. So let's get started with the clip.
I had an alter ego, and he was like this boy that I customized in my mind of the ideal boy. Other girls looked so different than I did. They were, expressing themselves very differently.
Hey guys, so for today,
I was depressed, hopeless, and I was feeling pretty dejected and scared and alone.
Here we start with Daisy Strongin here, who's one of the individuals featured in the PragerU documentary along with Abel Garcia. Now I want to be very clear that I support people who want to detransition, and I watch detransition stories a lot because it helps me as a therapist to understand their experiences, and it helps me to be a better gender therapist. And their voices do matter. I do have a ton of empathy for anybody who feels like the medical community mistreated them or didn't inform them of any possible negative outcomes. And at the same time, I am also fully aware that these cases are actually very rare. So I just want to make that clear. I would never ever shame somebody who is detransitioning. All people's stories are very important. And I also believe in being kind to people. So I can have empathy for Daisy's story a lot, and also at the same time realize there's a lot going on here that PragerU doesn't bring up that's probably very relevant. Like the fact that we do know why people detransition, and this is usually due to external factors like pressure from parents. They didn't interview Daisy's parents in this documentary, but we do know that they weren't supportive of Daisy's transition. We can probably assume that they struggled to use the right pronouns. They probably created an unsupportive environment. And that really wears on people over time and brings them down. There's a clip where she says something like, I could act and look like a guy, but deep down I knew that I wasn't. So let me just see if I can find that clip.
You're incomplete. You're not a guy. You never will be. But even though you're legally, your driver's license says you're a guy, you're not. You finally have expressed your true inner self or whatever, the thing that you wanted to do so badly ever since you were 13, 14 years old. You did this thing to alleviate this gender dysphoria, that wasn't there before, but you made it into a problem, and now your body image issues are worse. That's not supposed to happen.
And I know firsthand that this experience is not true for most trans people, but not all. Most of them actually forget that they're trans and just live a life as the gender they've transitioned to. So it's not really something they think about too much. But if you have a parent or a conservative church community or just any community where people are constantly reminding you that you're not the gender that you are, they're putting doubts in your mind, then that's going to make you think of it much more, if you know what I mean. And another thing they don't tell us is that Daisy still has gender dysphoria, which she says is mild and manageable for her. She's now 24 years old. Also, I want to point out that she started testosterone at 18 years old and had her top surgery at 20. So she was not under age 18, which to me shows that the medical doctors and therapists did not push their agenda onto her. She waited before starting any medical transitioning procedures, and she did have a history of gender dysphoria, which is what therapists are taught to look for before recommending any medical transition. So we're supposed to look for long-term or persistent gender dysphoria. What we also know is that her detransition was influenced by a religious conversion. And we know that some religious people love to use that to show the power of God or as proof that This must not be the will of God. But as we know from the ex-gay movement, that facade only sticks for a certain amount of time before the underlying truth does start to come out. So it's possible that 10 years from now, Daisy could express her truth about her gender dysphoria being more severe and transition back to being male, just like the religious ex-gay movement. The founders of Exodus Ministries claimed that God saved them from being gay. Then a few years later, they actually left the movement and admitted they still had same-sex attraction and decided to live their authentic lives. So at 24 years old, Daisy still has a lot of maturing to do. I do wish the best for Daisy, but I do not think that her testimony is really good evidence of any wrongdoing from medical providers or therapists. By the way, my name is Catherine Sloan. I'm a licensed therapist. Please subscribe to my channel. I also want to add that I do not work with youth at all. I don't specialize in gender issues with youth, but I do pay attention to the research, and I'm following this really closely. The second fallacy of this documentary is they fail to mention that currently research indicates that a vast majority of individuals who undergo gender transition report positive outcomes in terms of psychological well-being and quality of life. So here's an article by the AP showing that the regret rate is about 1%. It says, in a review of 27 studies involving almost 8,000 teens and adults who had transgender surgeries, mostly in Europe, the US, and Canada, 1% on average expressed regret. For some, regret was temporary, but a small number went on to have detransitioning or reversal surgeries, the 2021 review said. This documentary just centers the narrative on a small subset of the transgender population. The documentary misrepresents the reality of the transgender experience, contributing to misconceptions and biases. If I could personally gather my clients who have transitioned and put together a documentary, I could tell the stories of 30 or 40 transgender people who transition and do not regret their transitions. Let's also keep in mind that detransitioning does not always include regret. So if you hear that somebody's detransitioning, don't just assume that they regret doing it. One of my favorite detransitioners is Lucy Kartikasari. I'm not sure if that's how she says her last name, but she goes by Lucy, and she sees herself as post-trans.
Is that gender joy can thrive at any stage, whether that's trans joy or detrans joy. Just basically, don't ban trans healthcare. We need it. We need it. And ultimately, we all suffer under queerphobic oppression. My God, I just want to also point out to people, even though I've detransitioned, I'm not always perceived as a cis woman in society. I still suffer under transphobia, and all these right-wingers who are so vehemently against trans people, they're not going to check what's in my pants before they hate crime me, to put it bluntly. And the thing is, there are also cis people who suffer under transphobia.
Yeah.
So it's not conducive to anyone to continue with all this hate. It makes no sense. Anyway, love wins. Always.
Love wins.
But the conservatives don't focus on those stories either. They just focus mainly on the people that do regret their surgeries or transitions, which is just 1% of people who transition at the current moment. That could change. The third fallacy in this documentary is they actually don't bring in real medical professionals or experts in the field. These two professionals they bring in, Harmeet Dillon, she's a political activist for the Republican Party and a lawyer. And Lior Sapir, who they call doctor, is actually a doctor in political science. He's a political activist too. He's not a medical doctor. And I want to show you something they totally forget to tell you about the research he discusses here. Listen to this clip, and then I'm going to use his own research against him.
Mastectomies on teenage girls went up 13-fold between 2013 and 2020. Between 2016 and 2019 alone, these procedures went up by 500%. A study published in 2022 by researchers who are advocates of gender-affirming surgeries showed that the youngest patient to have received a radical bilateral mastectomy in the United States is 12 years old.
I can't wait to show you something they totally forget to tell you about the research he discusses here. So let's go directly to that article they are referring to, and let me show you what the rest of that article says as far as regret. So let me ask you this question. Out of 209 patients who had top surgery, how many do you think had regrets post-op? Two people regretted their surgery. Incidence of gender-affirming mastectomy increased 13-fold, 3.7 to 47 per 100,000 persons during that study period. So it says of the 209 patients who underwent surgery, the median age at referral was 16 years, range 12 to 17, and the most common technique was a double incision. Here it's talking about the incidences of complications, which are pretty low, and then it says 2 patients had documented post-operative regret, but neither underwent reversal surgery at follow-up of 3 and 7 years post-operatively. Now, I will say that I hope they do a follow-up at 10 years and 15 years to see if there is an increase in regret. We just need more ongoing, unbiased research to understand this issue more. So I hope you can see how this lack of diverse perspectives creates a skewed understanding of this issue. And a more balanced documentary would include interviews with healthcare providers who specialize in transgender health, more mental health experts who can speak to the psychological aspects of gender dysphoria, and transgender individuals who've had positive transition experiences. Now, I know this is a very divisive topic right now in our community, in the US especially. The goal would be to always do no harm. I always recommend that people take medical transitioning very slow. And I know Dr. Z, who's a well-known gender therapist on YouTube, agrees with this statement. So in summary, while the documentary DeTrans brings attention to the stories of individuals who regret their transitions, it's just very one-sided. It relies on a small number of cases, like 3 or 4, and uses fear-mongering to make it an unreliable source for understanding the complexities of transgender experiences and detransitioning. I'm going to end with this lovely clip that I adore.
This shit is simple. We didn't just ask a geneticist. We asked endocrinologists and a few psychiatrists and gynecologists, and they all said the same thing. Intersex, trans, non-binary, and all the other gradations on the gender, future, sex, love, sounds continuum are normal human variation. And whatever discomfort we may feel in the changing norms of reality, myself included, it is no match for the discomfort and fear felt by those seeking acceptance. Yet for some reason, anti-trans legislation increased over 800% since 2018. 800%! What could justify this unprecedented urgency? Did trans people storm the Capitol? Did they steal classified nuclear intel from the White House and keep it in a humidor in Florida? What is the threat?
Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.